This weekend we had a garage sale, and one of the things that I noticed that was interesting was as soon as we advertised we were having the garage sale, and people are asking, "What are you selling? Are you selling video games?" That kept coming up, and then people showing up kept asking, "Any video games for sale? Any video games?" And then they'd tell us, "Oh yeah, I collect old video games," and each one of them seemed to think it was kind of unique that they did that, and there's probably like a dozen or so people coming up asking for video games, and I would talk to them sometimes and say, sometimes I would just say no, or if I felt like talking to them, I'd say, well, no, I collect video games, so I don't want to sell any of them. Then we'd start talking about what I collect, and I would think having kind of a real conversation, but then it would just turn to, well, how much to sell that? How much? I'll give you whatever you want, and offer me $100 for old Nintendo games or different things, and I wasn't interested in selling it. And it was just kind of a weird thing. And most of the people, I'd say, were men that were between probably around 35 to 40. So fairly close to my age. I'm 33 right now. I'm almost 34 later this month. Happy birthday to me. And there's kind of a desperation to them when they would start, well, I'll just show me what you have. Come on, please. Oh, come on, don't tease me. And I'm not teasing you. I thought we were just talking. And I was upfront that I don't want to sell. And this got me thinking about something that's been on my mind for a while anyway. Something I've been thinking about is why. So last week I talked about why I like retro gaming. This is a little different. It's about why is retro game collecting so popular? Why is it what it is? Why is it such a crazy booming market? And that, I think, is kind of a complicated topic. So for me, I had a lot of these systems growing up, and eventually I sold some of them. I sold my Nintendo, my Super Nintendo, I sold a Atari a few years back, and one of the reasons I sold them was because I knew you could get a lot of the stuff through emulation, well, pretty much all of it, and you could even get it through official channels like the Virtual Console on Wii for a lot of it. So I knew I'd have access to the games, and I didn't play them that much, and they were just kind of sitting in my garage. And if you can't tell, I'm coming to you from my garage today, and I figured, well, if I'm not using them at the time, I didn't really have the idea of getting my kids into it. I thought my kids wouldn't really be into it since they have better options. So I just thought, time to get rid of them. And I try not to be too materialistic, and I don't want to buy into consumerism to the level that owning something is supposed to equal happiness or something like that. So that was also kind of on my mind. That's always been something kind of on my mind. But as you can see from my garage full of stuff, I'm not the best at practicing it. It's not the easiest thing to do in our society. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But anyway, with selling that stuff, and in the past when I've traded in games or sold games, it's always kind of haunted me later, where I wanted them back and regretted selling them. And same thing happened there, where a few years later I started missing the old games, missing the old systems, and I started watching more and more YouTube gaming, and found out that was a big thing. That was something that didn't used to interest me much. I didn't used to watch as much YouTube, and the gaming side of things seemed pretty boring to me at first, especially like Let's Play type things. I was like, well, I like playing games, I don't like watching strangers play games. But the more I got into it, the more it kind of took hold of me, and I was like, I gotta get these games, I want to get back into this. And it became like a really kind of a drive where I was like, I gotta get an NES. I need an NES back. And to see like how prices had gone up, I was like, well, I shouldn't have sold it, because for one thing, if I had it now, I could sell it for quite a bit more than I got then. Even stuff that I got good money for, like I bought Earthbound when it came out, and I was a big fan, held on to it for years, and then when I was kind of strapped for money and going through this phase of not trying to hold on to too much, I sold it and I got a good amount, but I could get twice that now. But even so, it's the same thing where if I even sold it now and got, say, $300 for it, I would still probably regret it. And it's kind of weird, because even games I didn't like that I owned, I still want to have them back just because I own them. And I don't really know exactly why that is. I think there's a few different reasons, though. Of course, the big one right now is nostalgia. Nostalgia seems to be bigger than ever. People are diving into it wholeheartedly. There's tons and tons and tons of stuff on the internet just dedicated to nostalgia. And I think back very fondly of the 90s. I kind of miss some things about the 90s. The 90s, a lot of things had kind of an edge and attitude towards them, or in them, even though a lot of it was kind of manufactured, but things felt more edgy. And I'm not one of these guys who's gonna go off on PC culture and millennials ruining our society or anything like that. Like, it's ridiculous, but there is a difference in the time we live now and my impression of the 90s then. I mean, that was just me. Like, my experience was that it was a more time where cynicism was bigger, and where things were kind of more questioned, and like things were edgier, basically. I mean, that could be different for other people, but that's kind of how I experienced it. It was also the time when I came of age, so that probably has a lot to do with it. Probably most people have some kind of affection for the time they grew up and when they came of age, and think it's better than the time they're in now. Because probably part of that's just your childhood innocence, looking back on it in ways that probably aren't that accurate. Like, if you were to go back and have a time machine and just watch yourself, you may be surprised and say, well, maybe things weren't that great then. But even if you know that, part of your brain doesn't know that. So I think that's part of the appeal, is I want the things that I had growing up. Why do I want that, though? Am I trying to have another childhood? Am I experiencing an early midlife crisis? Is that why all these like 40-year-old guys are coming up to me begging me to sell games at my garage sale? I don't know. I don't think so. It'd be an early midlife crisis. I should hold off a few years, hopefully. But I mean, there is some. When I was young, and most of my life, I consider myself like a pretty fun-loving, not carefree, but not super stressed out guy. That's pretty creative, having a good time. And then coming out of college and going into adulthood in the workplace and everything, that changed a lot, where having a family and having bills and needing money and feeling more stress kind of made me more serious and more grumpy and changed me. And I'm sure that's natural, and part of growing up is probably becoming more serious and kind of losing that childhood wonderment. But maybe games are a little way to experience it or get it back. I don't know. I mean, not everyone fully loses it. That's why stuff like Tim Burton is as popular as it is, because he still has a way of looking at things in a childlike way. Even if some of the movies are hit or miss now, you can always count on that his visions at least can be interesting and show things in in a different way like that. But beyond that, part of it is, it's not commercialism in the way that I'm not seeing a lot of TV commercials and the products aren't being pushed on me. I'm more seeking them out, which it is commercialism in that it's peer-to-peer commercialism. We do it to each other. You watching this video, I'm putting things in your head and building up more about the retro gaming market. If we weren't doing this, it wouldn't exist. Or it exists to a much smaller degree. I mean, there's still collectors. There's people who have collected all their lives long before YouTube. But there's a lot more now. YouTube kind of supplies an echo chamber of people expressing an opinion, hearing the opinion, making their own video, spreading the same opinion, and so on and so forth until that opinion is spread around everywhere. Look at something like E.T. crashed the whole gaming market and destroyed gaming until Nintendo came and saved it. That's something that, I mean, they're somewhat factual in a few ways, but it's also been blown out of proportion in a lot of ways, especially if you look at it on a worldwide scale. Places like Europe were not affected in the same way, but because of stuff like Angry Video Game Nerd, we all kind of see it the same way. But it's just building up that culture, and you want to be a part of it. And you see these guys, and they have their games, or girls, and then you think, well, I can do that too. And you can. I mean, I'm not a guy that has a lot of disposable income. That's why I always look for deals, and I never spend too much on the gaming, but I am always looking. Even when I'm not actively really hunting things, I just keep my eye on things. I'll still check eBay or Craigslist or other sources, and I'll even do the same thing that these guys do, where maybe I'll just say, hey, I got a morning free, why not jump around and look at garage sales? Why not look around the flea market? And almost exclusively I'm just interested in looking for games. I'm not interested in other stuff there. But it's also interesting because why is it video games? I have nostalgia for a lot of things, I'm sure we all do, but I'm not out there hunting the toys I grew up with. I know some people do, but I don't think it's to the same degree. It's all an aftermarket because these things are old, and what makes me want to get really outdated technology, some of it 30-year-old technology, why do I want that instead of, why would I prefer that over getting something that's just made state of the art? I wouldn't do that in other areas. If I was gonna buy like video equipment or something, I wouldn't want to buy a 30-year-old camera if I could buy a camera from today. But for some reason it's different with games. Maybe it's because they're interactive, so we have another element to them because we're a participant in the games. That probably adds something to it. It's not as passive as watching a movie or reading a book, which those can hold some nostalgia for us, but they don't make, there's not this big market for it. I mean, the market's so big that there's companies that all they do is make things to help us play the old games. There's stuff coming out constantly. There's new controllers for old systems, there's new cables to hook them up to modern TVs, there's new ways to play all the ROMs on systems, there's just always something. Clone systems. Retro market seems bigger than ever. Some of these systems, like Saturn or Dreamcast, are more popular now than they ever were. And it's hard to say exactly why. I'm not sure, and if you have thoughts on it, please tell me in the comments, because I'd be very curious of other people's opinions on it. But there is that. When I had the drive to get a new NES, because I didn't have an NES, I don't know exactly what I was thinking, because I mean, I'm a grown man. I know that owning it is not going to equal happiness, like just holding it or having it in my home, but part of me still kind of felt that way, where it's like, I'll feel good to get this thing. And then when I got it, I mean, I was excited. I did feel kind of good, and it's fun to go back and play, but not in any kind of magical way. Once I got it and I was trying to play it, it's like, oh yeah, this thing was a big pain, because you could barely get games to work on it, even when it was new. So then I had to take it apart. I had to order a new pin connector. I had to clean it out, like really get involved with it. It's like, yeah, and then don't blow in the cards, clean your cards, turn the cards to the side, push it in and out. Like, so some part of me enjoys dealing with the quirks of the system and having a physical cartridge and trying to get it to work and that kind of thing. Even though it is kind of silly in this day and age, where I could just do it all on my computer with no problem and make it look better and use whatever controller I wanted. But we choose to go back and try to, I guess, relive something or experience something. And then the other interesting thing is I have equal interest in getting systems I never owned, or things I don't have the same nostalgia for, just things that I kind of knew about that I find interesting now. And to some degree, this is probably similar to younger people that are into retro gaming, people that didn't grow up with it but still want to collect it. There's just something kind of interesting about the old tech, that it's interesting in a way that some other old tech isn't, though. It's like, I'm not that interested in seeing old calculators or using old phones or things of that nature, but the stuff is pretty fascinating. So maybe it is that interactivity, or I don't know, there's just something more appealing about this than other forms of technology or entertainment as far as collecting. And then there's the type of collector that wants to collect everything. They want to have complete libraries. And I don't, if it was a really small library, like something like a Virtual Boy, I could see the appeal of that. And I guess if you're really into it and you had the resources and you had the space to display it, I could see the appeal. But buying poor quality games and building up your huge NES library, I don't know. It's just, I'd rather, I guess, just collect the games that first I grew up with and that are of the highest quality. Maybe that's just because I have the limited resources and limited space. I don't know. Maybe I just don't see the point in spending money on something that is not that good. But it is just interesting that it is as big as it is. So please share your thoughts on retro game collecting, your experience with it, what you've observed from other collectors, what you think about this whole market of after products that they still produce. Let me know any of your theories or thoughts on why we're so drawn to it and why it's as big as it is. I'd be very interested to hear. Thanks for watching.